I remember looking at my Titania deck and like every single card in that deck that like didn't fit just kind of like glowed to me almost. I was like, why the fuck is this card in here? What?
A
And like
moment of clarity.
it really was a moment of clarity. I was like, I think that night I fell in love with zero mana cards.
So, wanted to talk to you because you are the commander expert that I grew up with. So, wanted to ask you questions for people who need information on their mana bases specifically, but general advice for commander.
Happy to help.
How many commander decks have you built, do you think, while playing Magic?
It's a probably a big number. I think easily 20 probably. At the current time, I think I have 7 right now. But
Seven
at
built to play right now.
let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or I would say I had 4 at the beginning of quarantine of coronavirus.
Okay.
I have since built 4 decks since then. Since I haven't been able to play as much, I feel I might as well have fun with these pieces of cardboard I have in like
Yeah.
another way.
Honestly, like if you can't play with other people, you might as well just rearrange them into new piles.
Yeah.
So, who is the favorite commander that you've ever had?
Titania by far.
Oh my
Titania
gosh.
is my baby. And like I think my favorite thing about it, I remember I think it was Wes said like when I mentioned to him that I took that deck apart, he actually was like, "Oh, that's sad. That deck's been
Cool.
around for so long."
So Wes is also one of the commander people that we have at our local gaming store. He's like, would you say he's like the cool uncle, or would you say he's like,
I would say he's like the dude from The Big Lebowski. I remember looking at my Titania deck and like every single card in that deck that like didn't fit just kind of like glowed to me almost. I was like, why the fuck is this card in here? What?
a
And like
moment of clarity?
it really was a moment of clarity. I was like, I think that night I fell in love with zero mana cards. If Titania is what I want to do, and my plan is winning through combat, I'm really just want to make my curve as low as possible.
Why do you love commander?
I like the variance. The increased variety in hands is really what I think allows the format to have as much life as it does. Like when you can have like a constructed max 4 of card deck, and those decks can be very good at having a consistent game plan.
Mhm.
And I think the great thing about Commander is it's a lot harder to have a consistent game plan.
That's
And so
true. Yeah.
there's a lot more ways that you have to think of how many different cards go with your game plan as opposed to how like how streamlined your deck is with cards. But I mean, you still streamline, but there's more variance, different hands.
You have to think of all these play patterns and find pieces that fit those play patterns to make the whole deck work, no matter what you have.
Yes, just a lot of statistics in Magic,
Yes.
and it singleton formats decrease all of the like percentages and chances, and so a lot of times it's you just have to work with it in a different way than usual.
Like a literal needle in a haystack.
Yes, very much.
All right.
But that's also why I think in Commander tutors are so excessively powerful. Like that stuff is just every spell in your deck plus 2 more mana, basically. Which it is.
I mean,
It's
yeah.
in a singleton format, the maximizing the amount of cards, as I was saying, like helps improve that that optimum play.
That's true. Like in a game of variance, tutors are what allow you to have consistency. All right. So I'm going to ask a couple questions about mana bases. I know when building commander decks, I've always had issues with making my mana bases. I usually have to come to you or Durka or someone else who loves commander to help me out. So I'll ask a first question here. How many lands in a generic basic deck do you think it should have? Like a range.
I usually run 33, maybe 32 to 35. I would say 35 is definitely the middle ground.
How do you decide the colors of the lands once you've picked the number of lands you want to use?
So I always get out like a spreadsheet pretty much. So if you separate out your deck by CMC and you count all the symbols. So you take how many blue symbols over how many total symbols, and you have how many white symbols over how many total symbols. And whatever ratios those are, you want your land counts to be exactly the same as that, or at least roughly the same.
Roughly estimate. So you separate your deck out into converted mana costs, and then from there you take the total number of color pips, or whatever you want to call them, on the card. And then you take numerator denominator of the colors, and then you put it over the full. So that's awesome. Yeah, that's an easy way to break it down.
And something I don't think like people do often, like when you look at a fetch land, you really want to count that as any color. You want to put that in the same pile as command tower, because it really does have the abilities to get either of them, as long as you're playing the lands that they can fetch.
All right, so that's a really great tip, making sure you count your fetch lands and things that fetch into multiple colors as those multiple colors, and not as the specific color on it.
Yes.
Okay, that's awesome. All right, so we have the mana base number. We're deciding the ratios. Now, how many non-colored lands would you think would be too much in a commander deck?
I think it's that amount very much depends on how many colors you're playing.
Okay.
I would say if you're playing one color, let's say you're playing a mono blue deck, I think you can easily get away with like 5 to 10. But you're playing two colored lands, I really think like 5 should almost be your limit. I really wouldn't go more than like 3 or 4. And even if you are running those, they should be like an ancient tomb, something that like it ramps you. If you're playing a 3-color deck, unless you're playing a lands deck, you don't want anything like Maze of Ith type of things. Because like if that's one of the 3 lands in your hand and you're playing 3 colors, there's a good chance you're gonna have a bad time.
I'm guilty of that with most of my decks. I want to play all of the utility lands that don't have the mana to support my deck.
And if you're playing like 4 or 5 colors, you should only have like 1, maybe.
What would you think would be the best dual and tri-land cycles for decks that maybe people wouldn't think of?
I think some of the better budgets ones, especially now because they're pretty cheap, are the Scrylands. I think the Scryland, the temples, I think those are a very powerful effect, and I think it is worth having a land that enters tap. So just recommend Tango lands, and yes, I'll call them Tango lands.
Yes.
I am very much a fan of running lots of fetch lands, and therefore running lots of lands that are basic land types, like mountain swamps, etc. And something I would also say, like man lands, I don't really like man lands very much in Commander. I think they're pretty alright, like in like more competitive constructed decks.
Let's say top 3 lands every deck should be playing.
I think it's pretty obvious Command Tower should go in every single deck. I also think I would say Ancient Tomb. I really just love that card, and being able to cast a 3-mana spell on turn 2 just is very, without even just needing another card, just hitting land drops is very, very powerful. I really don't know if any other lands are necessary. Something I think that I fight with myself about it a lot is I do not like Temple of the False God.
No?
I play it in some decks, but even in those decks, I really am tempted to take it out sometimes.
Just because you have to hit that threshold of lands?
Yes, there have been more than a almost non-zero amount of times that not hitting the threshold keeps me out of the game. I play very low curve mana cards, so it's a lot of times less likely I'm gonna get to it until after I've already done most of my game plan. But yeah, if you're playing longer games regularly, if you hit your 8th, 9th land drop regularly in Commander, Temple's awesome.
Yeah.
Temple's almost always going to be all right for you.
So when is it mana screw and when is it time to change your deck?
I think it's time to change your deck when you're not having fun. If you're spending your time on this hobby that's supposed to be leisure and you're not getting enjoyment, at least from how your deck is performing, or like as you specifically mentioned, like if you're not getting enough lands and it's constantly a problem, maybe you should recount. Maybe you should look at your mana curve. Where do you curve out? Do you have enough lands to meet that every game?
How many basic lands should the average deck be playing?
I think it definitely matters depending on the number of colors you're playing.
Okay.
Monocolored deck, I would hope you're playing a lot of them.
Yeah.
You don't really have much more choices. But if you're playing a 2-color deck, I think it can vary between maybe 10 to 20 almost. I've seen some decks that decks that would want to run back to basics type of effects, where if you're playing like 2 colors, it really doesn't hurt you very much, like having a lot of basics.
Yeah.
And there's also a lot of times, like I was saying before, I'll have so many enter tapped lands that I'm like, why is this just worse than a basic for me?
And then in a tricolor deck, do you think just like 1 or 2 of each, or?
I think, yeah. I would definitely, usually I will have like about 5 basics, and I think usually I'd have 2 of your more important ones and 1 of your least favorite ones. If your deck is more focused on 1 color, I would maybe add maybe 6 lands and then have 3, 2, 1. But also for like 4-color decks, I think it's the same type of thing. If you have 1 color that's much more pronounced than the others, I would run 3 or 4 of those and the others. But usually it's like 2, 2, 2, 1 a lot of times. I think it's also very important to have basic land targets because of how many Ghost Quarter, Solemn, Path to Exile. There are a lot of effects in Magic that make you go specifically for a basic.
So is there a merit to playing snow lands versus regular lands? And is there any inherent danger in playing them instead of regular lands?
I think it matters how well you know your play group.
Okay.
I think if you know that you're playing against people who play Extraplanar Lens, if you know they're playing that card, they're going to be playing snow covered of all their lands. And at that point, you can just one-up them and play all snow covered of your lands.
Yes.
And be like, ha, thank you.
Yeah.
But
thanks.
like I as I said, it definitely depends on Extraplanar Lens is the first card that definitely comes to my mind. And the second one is it's a lesser one, but Predict. When I was playing D&T, it was playing like half of regular planes, half snow cover planes. Because against the like miracle matches, there's a much larger percentage, since I'm a monocolored deck, that they're gonna maybe hit the top card.
It's true.
And like I've had times where I flip it and they name like planes and it's a snow covered planes and it's like, sorry, You don't get 2 cards.
So the only negative for that, at least in Legacy Death and Taxes, is the fact that it hurts me as someone who thinks it's aesthetically displeasing.
Oh, it's definitely aesthetically displeasing.
Is playing a monocolored commander always cheaper than playing a multicolored commander?
I think so, personally.
Yeah.
But I think that's just stems from the fact that lands are the most expensive thing in this game. And if you want a consistent deck, you don't have to look very far for a monocolored mana base.
No matter what format it is, you think it's going to be the bomb rare, like legendary creature, or the planeswalkers. It's always the land base that kills your budget.
And you just can't play Magic without them.
You can't play Evolving Wilds and say this is a Misty Rainforest. I just wanted to ask if you have any other advice to give about Commander.
I feel one of the more important things when it comes to maybe at least like playing with people that either maybe you haven't played with before, or like you haven't really gotten a chance to see all of their decks or all of their cards, is to like know what playing field each person is on. Are you a person that enjoys a Magic game where we are shuffling it up before turn 5 for game 2? Are you a person that wants to be here until midnight?
Well, thank you so much, Claire, for giving me your time and your advice. I appreciate it. We need to play some Commander soon so you can play your Stacks deck and make me really sad.
Yeah, no problem.